Hey, what's up, everybody? Chad Calek here, and welcome back to the In a Crowded Room podcast for episode number 92, which, if you could hear it in my voice right now, you can tell that I have a chest cold. It is that time of the year, especially when you have a wife who's a school teacher. She brings home a lot of these seasonal illnesses, but I'm pressing through. I've got my emergency down the hatch. I got my OJ. I'm going to be okay. But what I wanted to talk about today is I was actually researching a case for something, a totally different project that reminded me of this case I'm about to talk to you about. In fact, I'm going to talk about 3 cases total, but we'll start with one that occurred on January 10th, 1981. Now, before I get into these cases, understand up front that this is some dark stuff. But the reason I want to talk about these is because they reminded me of a concept that I'm really starting to believe has some legs to it. Something I thought years ago, and I'm just really starting to believe in this theory, which I'll discuss with you at the end of this. But let's go back to January 10th, 1981. There was a mother named Pamela Sue Berg, 24 years old. She makes a phone call to the EMTs, who show up and find her 5-year-old son named Alan Madden, finds him deceased in her living room. He has over 120 deep bruises. He's lost 13% of the blood in his body. His internal organs are crushed, in which shortly after, Pamela Sue Berg is arrested, along with her boyfriend, a man named James Crane, who was not the father of Alan Madden. Pamela Sue Berg's son, Alan Madden, was from a previous marriage that ended in 1976. So again, 5 years later, unfortunately, this young child was beaten to death. Now, what we learn through the interrogation is absolutely horrifying. They never state what it was about, but I guess Pamela Sue Berg had asked her son something, Alan Madden, and he lied. And she decided she was going to beat him. And she beat him badly. But when she was done beating him, he was still alive and breathing, but he was experiencing severe swelling. After she was done beating him, in which she sat down and began knitting gloves, winter gloves, the boyfriend, James Crane, came home and decided that he was also going to beat on the child, in which Pamela Sue Berg gave him full permission and sat and watched him beat Alan Madden to death. Now, the methods in which he beat this boy, I'm not going to go into all of them because it's really disturbing, but the mother described him picking the child up above his head and slamming him face first into his knee. Also swinging him by his ankles into the wall. Really heinous, disgusting, disturbing crimes, in which after beating him that bad, his entire body was swollen to the point that he was almost unrecognizable, in which Pamela Sue Berg and James Crane then decided we should put him in a bathtub full of ice, which they did. At this point, he was still alive and barely gasping for air, in which the bathtub full of ice was obviously extremely painful for him, in which they tried to hold him down in it. Eventually realizing that this was not taking the swelling away, they finally just drug him out to the living room, put a blanket over his head, and the mother took a nap. And James Crane made himself dinner. And right there on the floor, he died. Now, initially through interrogations, both claimed to have no recollection of what occurred. Now, one could say they're obviously lying to, try to save themselves, or there's a possibility that maybe they didn't initially remember. Very hard to stomach either. In fact, this was kind of the reason used as to why they waited so long before they called the EMTs to come, because it was almost 48 hours after the beating took place that the EMTs were called. And they simply claimed that they didn't really remember what occurred. And when they noticed that Alan Madden was, no longer moving or breathing, that's when they called the EMTs. Now, again, you could say they're absolutely lying, and that's when they were trying to figure out what they were going to do, and eventually realized there was no way out, and finally just called because they have a dead body in their house of a child. Or take them at their word, and they initially didn't remember what happened, didn't know where they were, and just suddenly found their child dead. That's hard to swallow, right? That's hard to believe. Really, really disturbing. Eventually, Pamela Sue Berg suddenly started to have memories of what occurred, in which she initially said, only I beat my child, and when I was done, he wasn't dead, he was breathing, he was fine. I never meant to kill him. I never meant to do anything like that. But she's lying, basically covering up for the fact that she allowed, this other man to come in and beat on her child. Or maybe he's convinced her to protect him, right? We don't know unless we're in her head. Well, after she gets 10 years, and that's amazing to me that she only got 10 years for this crime. And the reason she got 10 years is they said that it wasn't premeditated, that it was manslaughter, that she just meant to give her son a beating. That's it. And he accidentally died from the beating. Now, I don't know how that's justified. I read two different reports. One said he had 170 deep bruise areas on his body from head to toe, 170, which is why his whole body was swollen. Another report said it was 120. Whether it's 120, 170, who cares? Either way, it's amazing to me that she could not, wrap her head around the fact that her son was going to die from that. But she only got 10 years. After she was sentenced to 10 years, then she changed her statement, and she said, I don't want the man who actually, gave the final blows that killed my child, I don't want him to get away with this. So she, basically told her version of the truth and said, no, I beat my child, and then my boyfriend came over. And she said simply because he was a karate enthusiast and just wanted to beat on the child using moves he had practiced, she said, go ahead. Which, again, how did she only get 10 years? I don't get it. Eventually, James Crane was given the same sentence, 10 years, because he was somehow able to argue that he did not intentionally mean to kill the child either. I don't understand. I don't understand how you could, unleash a beating this violent and not assume that you were going to kill the child. There was parts of the report where, Pamela Sue Berg is talking about hearing his bones breaking as she was knitting her gloves, and she didn't stop anything. She just let him continue on. Guys, the reason these cases to me are important to know about is because when you get in the realm of the demonic, by all extensive purposes, this is what the demonic is. I think the demonic is it's the most confused area of the paranormal because of Hollywood. Hollywood really took the Catholic version of the demons and demonic and created monsters with it, with legions and crazy names. But what we're really talking about is evil. Evil being intelligent and having the ability to take over a human being and have them act like monsters, pure monsters. When you first hear the story, the initial thought is, man, you are not a human being. You'd have to be a monster, some kind of other creature to carry out something this evil, especially against the weak and the wounded, a child. A child, for Christ's sakes. I don't understand it. I don't understand how a mother could hurt a child that way, and I definitely don't understand how I definitely don't understand how a mother could allow another human being to hurt her child that way. But clearly, I believe at some point, the demonic, and when I say that, what I mean is pure evil in the world, because I think we can all agree upon that, right? There's evil in the world and there's good in the world, right? Can we all agree on that? At some point, pure evil found a way into the hearts and minds of these two individuals. And unfortunately, Alan Madden took the brunt of it. Now I'm going to tell you about another case that happened in 2006. A gentleman named Sean Bentler. Okay. Sean Bentler was from Bonaparte, Iowa, and his parents lived in Keokuk, Iowa. And he lived about 3 hours away. Shawn was known as, a decent guy, not an overachiever, but not an underachiever either. He liked his video games. He liked his weed. He was a decent student. He held a job, it was a tire company. For all extensive purposes, a normal kid, he might not be Elon Musk, he's not building a rocket to Mars, but, he's not a dummy or a loser in any capacity either. He's just a normal guy that hasn't really found his path yet. Well, on October 14th, 2006, Sean Bentler wakes up and decides it is time to drive to his family's home in Keokuk. And he's going to go see his 3 sisters and his mother and his father. And it's unannounced. He just decides he's going to go see them. He drives to their house. He walks in. He wakes them all up at 3:30 in the morning. And he does this with a deer rifle. And he gets them all out into the living room. And he brings them all out to the living room, in which he makes them all get on their knees. And he lines them up. And he starts executing them, from the father down to the youngest sister. Now, a couple sisters want to use their cell phones and are reaching for it, and he does not allow them to do so. But he does allow the youngest sister to call 911. Okay. Now, the 911 records have been sealed, but the press did know that this entire event was recorded over that 911 call. All right. So the event was recorded, and you could hear all the executions. You could hear everything that Bentler said to his family. You could hear his youngest sister, who was on the phone, it was her, begging for her life. And it didn't matter. Shawn executed her as well. All 5 members of his family. All 5 members. Once he was done, he got back in his car, drove, it was 3 hours back home, and he went to sleep. The next morning, he was awoken by his roommate, who said, "Hey, man, you need to get a hold of somebody, man." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And he told him, he said, "People are looking for you all over the news." And he's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, "Well, you need to talk to somebody. They're saying that something bad happened to your family and they were killed." This is his roommate. In which Bentler says, "Nah, man, whatever. Like, you're bullshitting me." And he grabs his phone and he calls and he leaves his mother a message, who he just executed. He leaves her a message and says, "Hey, man, I just got some weird ass message here from my roommate who's telling me that, People are trying to talk to me and something bad happened to you guys and you're dead or something. I don't buy it. Like, give me a call back. And after he leaves the message, he goes back to sleep. He doesn't run. He doesn't go on the lam. He doesn't barricade himself in. He doesn't, load a weapon. He goes back to sleep, in which the police find out where he's at, and they come and they get him, and they arrest him. Now, to this day, Sean Bentler claims to have no idea what occurred. Claims that he never left his home. He never killed anybody. He doesn't know what is going on. It wasn't him. This never happened. Period. He has no clue who did this. Well, he is found guilty, and he is given a life sentence. Period. I mean, there's no way around it. He did it. They knew it. They had the weapon. There were multiple video spots where he was picked up. There was home security footage, and obviously there's a 911 call. So he's sentenced to life, which he is doing life. And it was later said that he did it for inheritance. But what's really interesting is that he grew up fairly wealthy anyways, and he already had an inheritance that was coming to him. It's not like he needed the money at that time. He wasn't financially hurting. He didn't have bills racking up on him. There was no financial struggles going on in his life. He could have probably gotten any amount of money that he wanted from his parents by simply asking. So it didn't make any sense. But this was like the only thing they had to really go on, is the fact that the kid was kind of a pothead loner and they were this rich kind of uppity family. But again, he claims to have no idea of what went on. Now, both of these cases are really interesting because both of these people lived not too far from another girl I know named Laura Mooney. Bentler lived in Quincy, Illinois, only 2 blocks from Laura Mooney. And just over the hill from where Laura's house is, or was when I was there, is where Pamela Sue Berg lived. Now, in Laura Mooney's case, when she would undergo bouts of possession, she would claim to have no memory of what she was doing during those bouts of possession. And what I mean by bouts of possession is once you're possessed, if you're legitimately possessed, you're always possessed. But I'm talking about when you have these moments of lashing out and violence, or these moments where you begin making weird sounds and your throat puffs up and you're writing things with your hands in Latin, and cuts are appearing on your back and the inside of your legs, and like really bizarre. So that's what I mean by like a possessionary outburst. She claims during these moments that she has no memory of what is going on. And after reading about these cases back then, I remember leaving the IM6 case and just being like, man, I hope that I don't remember stuff thing is not going to lead to, some kind of murder or something like that, in which, Laura would just say, I don't remember it. I have no memory of it. But it got me thinking, what is going on in Quincy? And when I look at the history of Quincy, it was pretty glaring what was going on. It's not oddly enough, it's not in Quincy's history books, but it is in Iowa's history books. Chief Blackhawk, who was the Indian chief that was captured and was responsible for the creation of Iowa. I say responsible, I guess not responsible. He signed the Iowa Treaty. But Chief Blackhawk was a very, very defiant chief, the leader of the Sauk Indians. He did not like the white man. He did not like the West advancement. He saw it, the white man as a devil from day one. And he fought valiantly, right down to his last 300 soldiers having his back and fighting off thousands of pale-faced white boys, what he saw as the White Devil, and fought valiantly until he was arrested on Massacre Island in Davenport. Now, after he was arrested, if you've seen American Ghost Hunter, you know kind of part of the story. He was arrested and he was made to sign the Iowa Treaty, which he gave up all the land that he controlled between the Mississippi and the Missouri for 8 cents an acre, which was unheard of at that time, as far as being a low price. After he signed that treaty, after they got his signature, they ended up actually just killing most of his remaining, the 300 Sauk Indians that were there to protect him. They killed most of them, but Black Hawk himself, and whatever was left in Iowa, was transferred to Quincy, Illinois. And the remaining Sauk Indian that were separated from Black Hawk were later also transferred to Quincy, Illinois, where at one point they believed that there was over 3,000 Sauk Indian tribe members in Quincy. And there was a 6-year window, like I said, where the Quincy history books just jump ahead, and they don't talk about what happened, but we know what happened from what occurred in the Iowa side of history. In that window, what happened was the mass slaughter of the Sauk Indians, including Chief Black Hawk, who they decided, we got his signature now. We don't really technically need him alive anymore. So they just killed him. And once they did that, they also didn't have to pay the 8 cents. So what we have here is a massive, unatoned tragedy. Pure evil. Something absolutely horrible that went on in a place where no one talks about it. No one talks about it. And I guess my question to you is, and I'm not saying that, that Black Hawk's ghost or somehow is evil or anything like that. No, I'm just bringing that up as another evil thing in this town. Is it a surprise that all these cases that I just listed to you, these 2 cases plus Laura's possessionary case, occurred in Quincy, and then all these evil, horrible things that happened to Black Hawk and these, hundreds of Indians, they all took place there? I mean, was there no humanity whatsoever anywhere at that time? Well, clearly there was, because they kept a lot of this stuff out of the history books because they knew how horrific it was. At the same time, is there a revengeful messenger in Native American lore? Well, it depends on which tribe that you dig into, but that's absolutely a part of different land-based religions, is a revengeful God that takes, absolutely destroys lives and takes revenge for those who are unable to fight themselves. I don't know what the case is, but I know all of these events that I just told you about are just evil, man. The stuff that Laura went through that I saw was pure evil. The stuff that her father went through, collapsing, holding his heart, as she's, laughing, reading Reader's Digest, as the guy's literally like fighting for his life. I mean, there's just so much there. It is so dark. And I always felt it was so dark when I was there. And I've looked even since, and there's even more cases in Quincy that are just mind-bending, where you're like, God, how did this murder take place? How did this... So I guess what I'm asking is, like, if you take Sean Bentler's case, he's living in Quincy, and you take Pamela Sue Berg's case. Now, I know there were different entities, Sean Bentler, this Crane guy, Pamela Sue Berg. Was this 3 people that committed murders, or was it one spiritual entity that took over 3 people? See what I'm asking here? Is that the same entity, just basically killing in a trademarked way and affecting the right person when they're ready to take on their presence? The same evil, manifesting different people when they're at their lowest, at their weakest. Is there an evil in Quincy that just waits for people to break? Is that a possibility? Are there places on the earth that just foster evil, that foster death, that foster despair? And, are there these, these hellmouths, these, portals to hell, per se, these gates to hell? It's supposed to be one in Stoll, Kansas. It's supposed to be one in Pittsburgh. The Catholic Church certainly believes in that there are places like this. There are pockets of evil where it's the perfect storm for evil to occur. I find it really interesting that Bentler had no idea of what was going on. I find it really interesting that initially Pamela Sue Berg says she had no idea, doesn't remember anything. If you go and look at the Villisca Axe Murder House in Iowa, there was a guy who confessed, and it was George Jacqueline Kelly. He was a priest who said a black figure came to him in the night and said, "Suffer the children unto me." And he showed him how to do it. Because the question was always, how could one person with an axe kill this many people, 6 children and 2 adults, without all of them intervening or waking up? But yet that crime is also identical to Amityville. And DeFeo also said a black figure showed up and gave him the gun. Bentler killed his parents and his sister. It's just a reverse thing of Pamela Sue Berg. She killed her son and allowed her current loved one to kill him too. I mean, these are like unspeakable acts that are pure evil. So, does evil have, locations? Does it have places that it resides? And whoever comes across that swath of evil, if they get into a place in their life where there's a rip or there's a tear in that soul, or if there's something that allows them in, it just, the second that rip happens, that evil just fills the void. And now they're capable of acting like a monster. I mean, Sean Bentler, to this day right now, had no idea what anybody was talking about. And his behavior seemed to demonstrate that was absolutely real. I mean, he called his mom, left a message, and then went back to bed. I mean, if Pamela Sue Berg was going to try to cover up, the death of her child, you would think she would just get rid of the body really quickly, or have Crane do it, or, do the same type of bullshit mistakes everybody makes when they do these types of things. You wouldn't think that they would leave the child in the middle of the living room for 48 hours. And then 48 hours later go, "Oh, I guess we should call the EMTs." You would think there'd be some type of plan if they were trying to escape this. Well, and according to her, she was willing to lie, in her statement to try to make the case work in her favor, to say, when I punished him, he was still, breathing. No, I never saw my boyfriend hit him. She was cognizant and aware enough then that she was trying to, get herself whatever, the best judgment that she could. So what happened 48 hours earlier? Did her and her boyfriend, just freak out and sit still for 40 hours? Maybe they did. No one knows. But if you take them at their face value, maybe there was a window where they really didn't know what they did. Maybe they were possessed for a short amount of time. And maybe after these things, these entities, after it leaves and moves on to another person, maybe those memories come back. And maybe that's when people panic. And I guess I'm just begging that question. Do you think there are places in the world, Quincy, Illinois, if you will, where evil resides? And generationally, it just looks for the right vessel. And it'll keep killing. It'll keep doing these heinous acts where family members, are killing each other in the most vile ways, like in the Bentler case, in the Pamela Sue Berg case, Or when evil is waiting for the right person that could commit a Amityville Villisca axe murder, trademark style murder. Is that possible? Is it possible that there are places around the world that are kind of assigned to evil, where if you're in this location, is it more likely to affect you in a certain place than in another place? I'm actually leaning towards the idea of yes, that I think that there is the possibility that there are places in the world that are, these kind of like perfect storms for evil. I'm starting to think that might be the case. That might be the case. My mother was greatly affected in the house that we moved into, but so was the two previous families before us. Now, they never befell what my mother, went through, but they went through severe hauntings. Maybe all that means is that my mother just had more damage. And the two previous families that went in there, they didn't have the cut. There was no opening. But the first time somebody that had the opening came through, it happened. It happened. I would love to know what you guys think. Please leave me your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you all for listening to the In a Crowded Room podcast. I will be back tomorrow with more. All the best.